This is Chuck.
And this is Karen.
And this is our show.
What if it really works?
A practical guide to spirituality. And Karen, who is this man?
We are really blessed today to be with Randy Masters. Randy Masters is a healer. He's a teacher. He's a musician. He's so many more things than I could ever put into words. So we're going to talk to him today and let him share a little bit about who he is and the work that he's come in the world to do. Welcome, Randy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Karen really and Chuck, thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah.
So you came to Santa Cruz in the mid-'60s, right?
Yeah, 64, and then I entered high school right after that summer.
Oh my.
Then I went to high school here. Wow. And then I went to the university here, and then I taught at the university here. So Santa Cruz had my name on it in some kind of way. Yeah. I felt home here in a way. So, and nothing else has come up to move yet. So
you've really lived here basically all your life?
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. What a great place to live.
Well, all my life, I mean, except for maybe the first 14 years. Yeah. I just youthened there for a minute, I appreciate it,
Well, if our viewer if we could turn the camera around, the viewer would see that you have a fabulous view of the ocean, and you have created a house that's filled with symbols and energies of a spiritual orientation, which is very impressive to us. And it feels like that as well. Tell us a little bit about what got you over the hump in terms of becoming a spiritual seeker or a spiritual finder.
Well, I started getting into metaphysics in college, and I was really into it. I wasn't initially a music major, although my career is mostly in that. But those metaphysical studies were very interesting to me. And also, I was seeing a number of healers starting in the early 70s because my right arm was paralyzed in the birth process. So I finally started wanting to do things about it in a different way. So as I went to healers, they became friends of mine and mentors, and I began learning. And that information fed back into my music and other things I was doing. And then I started taking all kinds of metaphysical classes. The California spiritual emerging scene that was going on here was all around me, especially in Santa Cruz and the Bay Area, San Francisco, Marin, all around. So by pursuing that information fed back into my other work, and I began to integrate my practice in doing music and teaching with the spiritual stuff. And then seeing the healers gave me lots of different techniques that I learned from them.
So your music is one of the central cores of your life, is that
Most
correct?
of the time that's the way. I started out very young, and I started formal lessons in the 4th grade with the trumpet. And I taught myself piano and guitar and play some other instruments as well. So when I got into high school, which was 64, I started playing professionally. Wow. Right away. And keeping that going while doing my other studies. And then eventually the music just took over more and more and more till I was writing music, playing music, rehearsing, teaching, wall-to-wall music, thinking I would never want to do anything else. But then the spiritual stuff started coming in, and that opened up deeper mysteries in, well, how does sound and music really work? More than just the composing and the techniques and that type of thing. I started diving down the rabbit hole of how is this sound about? Well, how does it work? Well, what's really going on? Mm-hmm. And that was my question. How does sound work? Not necessarily just how does music work? In other words, even listening to one tone, what's going on behind that? And that was the guiding light that led me there. And then as I went into that field, in the late 80s, the sacred geometry world opened up for me, and I realized I had like a dual path to mix the sacred geometry and the music together. So I was on a very fast track to get the sacred geometry to come up online with the music. And then I began to hear the dialogue going on between the geometry and the sound and the ratios that were the same, and began to look at the unified field from a musical point of view. That's basically what I've done. I look at everything in musical terms. And so I made a bunch of discoveries that way by looking at the universe as a musical foundation. Sound and music, Nada Brahma, the original sounds, and the audible life string, they call it. And there's different terms for that the universe is made out of the sound, and the sound started it all. And so I started with music, and then I started getting more and more spiritual and more esoteric in the studies for a while.
What's the most remarkable discovery that you made in the world of sound? What sticks out as, wow, look at that?
I worked with a fellow named Wes Bateman, who was a telepath and received messages from people. He used to write for the Sedona Journal of Emergence magazine. And so he had been part of like a 30-year study of the pyramids. And at a certain point, I came into getting to know him, and we worked on things. And because I discovered an extended musical scale in his work. And he figured that his work was up at that time. He really didn't think he had more to do there. And then I showed him the scale, and then the roof just blew off. And we did all of our work. I only met him once in person in a 12-year period of time. We did it all over faxes and over the phone. I'd sit on the phone with my calculator, and we're talking back and forth. And he began to give me all kinds of insights about physics and the unified field and all of these various things. Some of it he learned in this lifetime, and others from the beings that he telepathed with. So as I began to look at the measurements of the 3 pyramids in Giza, where he had everything laid out, every single measurement that you could imagine from all those pyramids, there began to be patterns in the numbers. And they began to organize in such a way that I saw this musical organization behind it. And then we started focusing on the element hydrogen as being the key element that the pyramids were talking about. Everything you'd want to know about hydrogen was built into the measurements. So if you knew the numbers in the measurements, those numbers had other meanings in different sciences, if you got the numbers right. So I began looking into hydrogen. And so what I think I haven't written this up fully, although I've given it out to people, was the harmonic organization, the musical organization of the hydrogen spectral lines. And I put that all together. And that was very interesting because it's all 100% music. 100% music without fudging any numbers to try to make it fit. And those numbers are built into the pyramids, like the area of the triangular entrance stone, or the volume of a room, or the measurements in a room. The numbers were the textbook. The measurements in different units. Those numbers could mean things in different fields. And I began to see the musical organization of those numbers. And that was very, very fascinating. So I spent years doing that. And it was amazing training, working with him.
So it was different harmonics depending whatever the measurements were, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you get the units right, you could see it. But a lot of the books, a lot of the researchers kind of fudge things because they had their favorite measurement in cubits or meters or whatever they were doing. And they would often kind of try to romance the numbers around to fit their favorite version of the cubit and their theory of how things worked. And by not doing that, the numbers began to speak and talk. So I spent years working with those numbers, writing out all this stuff. And I did it in silence without putting music on when I worked. Because as I looked at these numbers, I could basically hear them talking. I had myself, my pencil, paper, and a calculator, and I'm just working on these things. And there began to be this dialogue. And I just sort of dropped down this rabbit hole of sacred math, ratios. And then Wes would tell me, oh, that relates to this. That relates to the fine structure constant of hydrogen, different things that I hadn't studied. And I had this crash course in all of that physics because he would tell me what my numbers meant. Oh, that's this. Did you know that? No, I didn't know that. I never studied it. See, because all I'm doing is looking for the musical patterns. I didn't know what they meant. So it was really interesting to get that feedback because I could accelerate very quickly and talk. So we did all this stuff over the phone before the good long distance rates. No Skype. It was fun.
So you were discovering the relationship between numbers and vibrations or sounds.
And wavelengths of color as well.
And wavelengths of color.
Yeah, translated. I used the wavelengths of color as if I was talking hertz or cycles per second. I just look at the number, and no matter what the units, feet, inches, temperature, it didn't matter. I would just look at the number and look at the ratios in a musical way, regardless of whether it was talking about wavelengths or hertz or inches or feet or cubits. It didn't matter. I just looked at all the numbers musically, and that's how I saw things. And so I could see the numerical patterns. My main talent, I think, was pattern recognition. I could look and discover patterns and then break those down. And I began to dive into the magic of the numbers and find the prime numbers that were hidden inside it as an additional code. I take any number apart. like the number that comes out of the Milky Way, 4,303 hertz exactly, as basically a C sharp. And that number is like 13 times 331. Well, okay, so the number 4,303, that's one number, and that has information in it. And then you can do things with that number. And then I look at the prime numbers that are inside it. And that's like opening up a treasure chest. Because if you understand how the prime numbers work, you know, those are like angels. Each prime number watches over whatever that prime number. So the prime number 13 watches over everything in the universe that's based on 13, like an angel. Like the diva of 13 is in charge of it. So that's a magical world of numbers that's not a left brain math. It's I would say a star language, some kind of a star language. I believe that that's what's going on. And so I dive into I'd take the numbers apart. I wouldn't just get the ratios. I'd look inside the numbers for all these patterns. And then I began to organize things according to the different prime numbers.
I'm fascinated by this, and the only way I'm going to get inside your brain is just to ask some pretty unusual or off-the-wall questions.
Yeah.
But where does the vibration ohm fit in?
Well, a lot of people feel that if that's pronounced the right way, the way you say it and what happens in your mouth, and you'll get different overtones and undertones out of the way you pronounce it. Mm-hmm. So we could have a whole room full of people and everybody could pronounce it, and we could take a computer readout of their voice print and analyze the overtones and undertones that they're producing, and they could be different because of
their frequency,
wherever their consciousness is.
But they also say that that's the essential sound. Do they not? Isn't that the essential? So what does that mean?
It's basically the sound, the whole sound of the whole universe, like a giant gong. Well, every possible sound in it at the same time. The sound of creation, or the primordial sea of sound that the creation is drawing from. I mean, this gets very, very deep, just looking at that one term. But it's how you spell it, how you write it, whether you do it in Sanskrit or Tibetan, AUM or Ohm, and some people even OHM, like in electrical engineering, which also relates, different kinds of Ohm. But the way that that's pronounced creates shapes, cymatic shapes, by the way you pronounce it, by the harmonic. So if your consciousness is in a particular place, the way you pronounce Ohm will sound different. Well, now, I saw a film that Steve Halpern showed me one time, and it's interesting. This film showed somebody pronouncing the Ohm, and they had a plate, a metal plate with sand on it, and what's called like a tonoscope, that when you pronounce it, the sound goes through and vibrates the metal plate, and a Sri Yantra formed. Now, I don't know if this was faked or if this really happened. I was told that this is actually what happened, and there was this master being who knew how to pronounce the Ohm. And this perfect Sri Yantra with all the 9 intersecting triangles and everything formed in that. After that, I asked to see it again because I went on a study of the Sri Yantra. It's supposed to be, when you pronounce the Ohm, this cymatic geometric shape will form. And I thought, isn't that interesting? And I've got a bunch of Sri Yantras around the house as a symbol in shape science, which relates to sound, shape form. That's the whole key to it. The mystery is about shape resonance. And that's the key to cymatics. Sounds creating shapes, and also shapes influencing how the sound will be shaped by the acoustics of the room, the acoustics of a musical instrument and the shape of it, all of those kinds of things. So I really got into this Sri Yantra. Then I began to ask people, where's that film? And everybody who had said that they had seen it, or used to have a copy, or was around somewhere in the 60s or 70s when that was made, nobody had a copy. Wow. Yeah, it's like, where did the film go? It was like almost taken out of this reality. So I don't really know today, until somebody duplicates that, how authentic that is. But there's a lot of texts that refer to the Sri Yantra as the visual pattern of the Ohm. And that's what I was seeing on this video, which was in real time. I watched it forming, but I don't know if somebody, did any kind of tricks. And I've wanted to see that again, because that's very powerful whenever you pronounce a certain type of sounds. And the key to it is in the vowel sounds. Mm-hmm. The vowel sounds is the magic in the languages, because that produces the overtones and the undertones. Like in the sacred names of God, they say you can't say it. True. Not because it's religiously against the tradition, basically, but because if you say it, you're not representing it correctly, because you're not making the sounds right. You have to sing it. tone it. If you tone it correctly, the undertones will produce the cymatic reality, and then you can pronounce the sacred names.
So when we say in the beginning was the Word,
Yeah.
it was likely to have been something like Om.
That's the idea, is the most primordial kind of first thing that might be said. But I think there's something prior to that usually isn't addressed in the texts. What occurred before the sound? Thought, I believe. Creative thought. That's my sense.
So we're dealing...
Something preceded the sound. And otherwise, how are you going to know what the sound is to organize around? What gave the sound the choices out of all the potential choices without something preceding that to guide it? And then the sound, I believe, birthed the light initially. And then once the light is happening, the sound and the light work together. They say, you know, the sound is the path, but the light lights the path so you can see the path. So now they're inseparable, but I believe at one time that truly, with that let there be light, if that were literal, that you're sounding light into being out of the vibratory, all potential, alpha omega of the creator space.
So one of the things we're learning on this trip is that we are probably very close to the tipping point where we either get this stuff or we don't get this stuff. And one of the things that's out there is the concept of healing with light and sound, or light and vibration, or light and color and sound and vibration. And this is basically about an energy field. And most of the world is involved with material reality as opposed to energy reality. So what we have heard is that light and sound and color and vibration are the new healing modes of where we're going. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, based on vibratory modalities. So that's going to include about everything you can think of. I call it a sensorium, different senses. So we've got the sounds working with hearing, whether you're deaf or not. I mean, the sound is still working in the field because the whole body hears. Then we've got wavelengths and light. Then we have reflected light, like any material object, a certain color. You're seeing what's not being absorbed. That's different than the light. Still color is involved, but if you look at violet color, red color, magenta, that's different coming from light than it is with what comes off of different fabrics and flowers.
And we're seeing all these colors being reflected in you and your shirt. And the
yeah, I kind of figured that kind of represents, me today, the whole rainbow thing.
That's wonderful.
I look at the rainbow spectrum. They say the rainbow is the Ark of the Covenant. It says that in the Bible, many sacred texts, as basically representative of the electromagnetic spectrum. So in that electromagnetic spectrum are different pulsations of which you get the sound, you get light pulsations, you have fragrance that gets in there. I mean, that's one of the oldest healing modalities in the world, is the essential oils, because it gets past the brain-blood barrier and opens up into the unconscious, into the amygdala. So that's another one to put in this group. A lot of the healers, so to speak, that I'm talking to that are into multimodalities, they've got lights that they can shine and show and work with, lasers and LEDs and all kinds of stained glass. That's a whole thing. Sounds in various ways. And then there's also shape, how shapes affect a healing situation, which is basically resetting of a blueprint or getting back to a homeostasis if something had gotten out of equilibrium.
So Randy, you've got a degree in theology. And you've been involved, I'm assuming, in worship situations.
Lots of,
And with your background in music, certainly the Gregorian chants and the medieval music and the chants from the Far East and the Near East must have some meaning. And somehow or another, between there and saying the Apostles' Creed, which is what appears in a lot of Christian ritual, we lost something, didn't we? What happened?
Basically, a type of interference in the development of consciousness that did not want the lights to come on in the general population. So
that's like when the priests were the only ones that could read?
Right. On purpose. Because people might wake up and might not go along with whatever program that somebody's wanting to administer, which is not what the original intent of the spiritual connection and connecting with Source was about. So a lot of the priests ended up running interference to make sure that the lights didn't come on and keep people busy doing rituals that did not wake them up. They did not have that many graduates of a lot of the mystery schools, because priests and priestesses made sure they did rituals that kept everybody busy, but did not turn the right lights on and make the connections based on the behavior. You look at the behavior of the priests and priestesses, you look at who's graduating, what they're saying, what music they're forbidding to be played because of certain intervals in the music that were waking people up, like the tritone, the augmented fourth or diminished fifth interval. They forbade that for a while. A bunch of things, restrictions that they put on the composers, because they knew that that music would wake people up. So they tried to control it and use it for ritual, but not have it be active enough for the lights to come on. It's like a big dimmer switch. Wow. That's the equivalent of also altering the text so that the words mean something else, or giving a sermon where you say that, like the word sin, what does that really mean? You know, and people can take that word and use it against people and punish people and have them feel bad, or they can really tell them in the ancient times, all the way back to Aramaic, what that word meant in terms of being beside yourself, you know, not being yourself and somehow missing the mark. Yeah. And all the various terminologies of what that actually meant, not a judgment and a punishment or anything like that. And so that things began to be distorted for political purposes, for control, which is called perception management nowadays. That's the term for it.
I can't believe that anybody would think that the church was trying to control people.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
But
imagine that.
Imagine that.
Somebody imagined it.
But when you talk about sin, many people don't realize that in the entire New Testament, Jesus mentioned sin, sinning, or sinners only 22 times.
Uh-huh.
And yet if you talk to people in churches, sin is the big deal.
Yeah.
It's the linchpin of the whole, literally the linchpin of the whole thing. And yet what you're doing is you're going back, as far back as at least the pyramids, and you're coming forward through the Middle Ages, mm-hmm. and you're also proposing that in the next iteration of where we're going, sound and sight and color and vibration are going to be more important mm-hmm. than some of the material things that we deal with today as if they're the most important.
Absolutely. That's attention has been misplaced. And the intention was that to restore the temple within. Mm-hmm. Now you can use temples and physical structures if they're built correctly and behavior is correct, but mainly that is to have you have a mirror image of the temple that's inside us, because all of that mathematics is totally encoded in the majesty of what a human being actually is, that very few I think have woken up to. What is a human being? What's possible? So people run around not knowing very much about who they are and pretending that they're far less. And yet all those codes are in our body. All the relationships that the temple is built by is in the canon of the human body, mm-hmm. meticulously. And these patterns are reflected all over the universe, either through the microscope and through the telescope. As small or as large as you want to get, those patterns are there. And but when people get that, we're running around with these codes, our shape. And that's kind of what it was all about with mummies, was, they took the organs out and everything. It was all about their shape resonance, so that their energy body could come and go between another world and this world based on coming into a vehicle that had a certain shape that had their signature on it. It was like their landing field, their landing. Uh-huh. That's real stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, really what they were doing with the mummies in terms of understanding energy bodies outside of a 3D version of reality, but a multiple dimension of reality had to do with shape and shape resonance. So all of these things fit together. There is ancient wisdom that's correct, and there's also ancient wisdom that wasn't, but just because it's ancient doesn't mean we need to worship it or make it real or try to recreate it, because in ancient times there were unusual behaviors to control people too. And so I'm looking at the ancient wisdom that deserves to go forward, was designed to, or maybe isn't trapped in time and space because it's more universal truth that still is true, combining with stepping down from the future into the present, information downloading here, like a time capsule that's not from looking in the past, but it's coming here outside of where we've been in the linear way, and downloading into the present tense, where then we integrate these things.
We've talked a lot with people about the children that are coming in right now. In fact, my Aunt Eleanor Wasson said that she's convinced that the future for us is going to be positive because these children are so special they wouldn't waste their time coming here if they didn't know that this was a very special time to be here.
Absolutely.
So who do you perceive around us, the children, other people, leaders, who can hear this music almost naturally?
I believe we were born to hear it, and then things happen where there's this illusion of a disconnect, where we don't hear this sound current. I believe it's built in all of us to do that, and that's the common ground we should see. That spark in everybody has a right and is their birthright to be in the big circuit, where anything that's needed to be heard of truth without distortion, that reinforces a healthy, pure blueprint according to the original design of our being, is our birthright to connect with, to be reawakened to wake up to. And there may be, for some people, like a time capsule. There's a time you water the plant and all of a sudden one day it sprouts. You know, they do all these things and it seems like the person is dense and doesn't get it. Then the next day they wake up and the next thing you know, they're the top student in the class. I've had a lot of students that, you know, all of a sudden woke up and then they just took off because it wasn't their time before for some reason. Their circumstances, their home life, their environment, mind development, brain development, something that wasn't quite there. And then when that clicked, you wonder, where have they been? How could they advance like that in a month? I have some music students that have done that. It was just mind-blowing.
That sounds like you.
Well, it sounds to me, I actually had a little nephew who, when he was very, very young, he was just, I mean, his parents had to just work with him to do his homework or to get concepts while he was in school. And then what I saw when I looked at him was I saw that he had some synopses that were not meeting. I mean, literally, they weren't making the connection. So I went in, you know, in the other world and connected them. And all of a sudden, it turned the lights on. This kid, now, you know, he first started studying photography because Chuck took him along and let him go on grips with him to do photographic assignments. But then all of a sudden he got a scholarship to SMU. I mean, full scholarship. I mean, it's like when it's time. I mean, fortunately, I was able to see. It just so happened that I moved to the same city that they were living in at the right time. Of course. And I could see what was really going on because I watched the aggravation that was going on with the parents, what was going on with the child. And I knew he couldn't be anything but smart. He had a smart mother, a smart daddy. You know, I knew he had all of it there. But everything wasn't making connection. And that's what I think a lot of things have happened. People have things happen to them that just throws them out of their zone. There may be the teeny tiniest little thing that keeps them from all of a sudden firing. Yeah. The pin doesn't fire. And then when you put those two pieces together and you finally get them together, they're like, and they just take off. This kid has just been a star ever since.
Is that like restoring the blueprint?
It's just amazing. Exactly. It's like restoring the blueprint. Yeah. All of a sudden, the connections happen.
And that blue is important. You're also wearing blue, which, you know, but how the blue fits in with the word blueprint is very interesting as well. My family background for a while was one where I couldn't really fully be awake, or I might have gotten in trouble. I had to kind of go along and deal with certain things. So I've sensed that there was a time when that was released, right when I was a certain year in high school. And when that environment changed, boom, I started composing music. I just took off. A lid came off. It was amazing. That couldn't before. Certain things were there when I was born. Certain things were awake. And then the way that all happened, I needed to shut down. So there was a closing down in order to fit in and not cause
Get by.
waves. Yeah. And then some things had to happen to take that armoring off so that I could wake up again. And that's what happened.
So you have real empathy with these people that are just about to wake up.
Oh yeah,
And
I have a
can-
lot of patience with my music students and students because of that wake up time. You know, I remember a master saying one time, don't underestimate anybody. And then they were working with somebody who, among the students, one of the students was irritating everybody. But the master was not bothered at all. And the others didn't even want this person around. He said, just, you know, let him be. And then one day, certain things happened. This person woke up and turned out to be the best student of all of them. He went from somebody who irritated everybody, none of them even wanted to sit around them or whatever, you know, pretty extreme. Because this person just irritated everybody, like they aren't getting it. Why are they so dense? Everybody's complaining. But the master said, no, you don't underestimate who that person is. And then when it was their time to wake up, they shot right up to the top of the class. Amazing. For whatever that was that had to come off, and somebody had to give them enough unconditional love so that those illusions could fall away. And the judgment from the other students wasn't helping. And so if we can see people more by who they are in as best as we can, no matter what all the irritations are, you know, to say, well, in spite of the irritations, there's this jewel there that maybe hasn't woken up. The lotus hasn't come out of the mud yet, so to speak, you know.
People always recognize that in you, don't they?
Well,
The answer
maybe
is
more
yes.
and more, but, you know, every
Yes.
once in a while it gets a little rough and I try to figure out what I do here, you know.
Because that's part of the secret, is to have that expectation and that orientation. And then it's
To hold that field for
yes,
it. The-
exactly.
Yeah.
And when you hold it for somebody, they come into it.
Yeah.
Almost automatic. I see you do that.
Yeah, and I believe, you know, like when we get around masters of different things, we're in their auric field. And in that field, different possibilities are happening that are communicated through field to field. So when you sit by them, you study with them, you shake their hand, they hug you, different things happen, you know, they might talk, they might look a certain way. All these different kinds of communications are emitted and radiated that penetrate another's field. And if those don't have judgments in them and they're connected up to the big pipeline, so to speak, you know, then you see that God spark, that creator in another being, and they start like emerging in front of you. It might take time. They might be upsetting you because of things, but still it's in a process. And I'd like to be able to feel like I could look at somebody and they could blossom because maybe nobody had ever looked at who they were behind all the fancy disguises and defenses and armor and behaviors. And sometimes I succeed at that better than other times. But when I have succeeded, I realized that holding that space made that difference. And I've had amazing music students and students because somebody had to show up that believed in them and hold that field until they could stabilize it, until they could get it. And it was something coming from the outside. It was to penetrate into their field so that they could feel like whatever was going to come out was really coming out of them. It wasn't being put in. I'm not doing the input. Same with healing. It doesn't come from the outside. To see them as whole and complete, even with whatever infirmities. Because I've had to deal with that. I've had people always ask me, hey, what's wrong with your arm? Ever since I was a little kid, I had to get used to thinking that something was wrong. You know? And then every once in a while I'd meet people say, I didn't even notice. Wow, that was kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
You know?
And yet at the same time, what some people saw was wrong was in fact part of your real strength.
I signed up for it.
Yeah.
You know, I play piano with 6 fingers. I mean, I teach, though, regular piano players who've gone on to do wonderful things. But when I actually play, it's mostly a 6-finger thing. I adapted to it. Trumpet was no problem because I could play left-handed. That's why I picked that instrument. It's the only thing I could hold as a little kid and play left-handed. So by default, I mean, it sort of chose me. But I always kept the piano going. I loved it to do that. So I've developed my own way of dealing with it. You know, so that has an effect, you know. Yeah. And so I feel that I voted for those things. You know, sometimes I wanted it to change, but I have to deal with what if it did, then all these years of it being a certain way. It's kind of mind-blowing, you know?
Sure.
What if all of a sudden I could use all the 10 fingers? I mean, wow. It's a little scary sometimes,
Sure.
you know, because it's so different than what I've adapted to. Yeah. But I'm, you know, working on lessening my resistance to being, you know, different if I need to be.
Well, do you feel that part of this healing that's possible for you and others is simply letting go of what you held on to for so long?
The story, yeah.
The story.
Letting go of the story is one of the greatest healings of all. You can't carry it through. It won't go through the eye of the needle. You can't try to justify whatever you think it is, whatever judgments, self-judgments we have, they're attached to the story where the story reinforces it. And that letting go of that is one of the ultimate deaths. The death where you die to yourself every day, basically. There's a book out by a guy named Comwell, Alistair Comwell. It's the Audible Life Stream. And the subtitle had something about, you know, basically learning to die daily. Meaning to let go of all those illusions and all that story completely and then become new. And the definition that I heard of humility was allowing somebody to be new every day. So even if they had certain behavior, the next time you see them, you're allowing them to be different. You're not assuming they have to be this person that irritated you the day before with this big story of their behaviors and expect that behavior from them because then they act out the behavior. This is easy to talk about sometimes, you know, but very challenging. Here's, you know, you never know. Well, are they going to go off again? And every time I've seen them, they had this behavior. You know, you get kind of gun shy, you know, or not gun shy. What's the word I want here?
Apprehensive.
Definitely.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who said, "The great way is easy for those who have no expectations."
Yeah.
And if you walk down that path and you have no expectations of how this person you're about to meet is or is not going to be based on anything, you've already made it easy.
Well, it's a nice walk on like a very sharp blade between not having those expectations, but also seeing this amazing potential in people, you know, that can really move you, like these new kids coming in and such. Yeah. And I also believe that being around those kids will create a sympathetic resonance in us, where hopefully more of the what they call gray matter will come online. It'll get activated by resonating with these really aware kids.
But let's go back to those kids again. They're called indigos and they're called crystals and they're called kids. What's going on with this? Is there something new happening with the children that are being born in this century?
I believe there is. I believe that they have different, what I've heard, they actually do have some different DNA that's been proven, not a new age story, that they actually have some other things going on in their DNA. And they've been prepared to come here for where the earth is going, that the previous generations did not come in with that circuitry already up and running. Not that we couldn't get it up and running, and I'm hopeful that we do. But these kids come born with, like they won't get some of the diseases, and they don't. They've taken them into labs and injected them with all kinds of crazy stuff. AIDS, you name it. The kids didn't get sick because they had a different immune system.
This is way off the course, but could that begin to explain why they associate vaccinations and autism, because these children don't need these vaccinations? I mean, I know that's out of your field, it's out of mine too, but it's...
Well, I know I'm around a lot of auspicious health people, you know, and they're very concerned about what the content of the vaccinations are and what the intent of the vaccinations are and what it's doing, the chemicals in it and the things that are short-circuiting. So that's a very destructive scenario there. And autism also, I think, is a combination of those chemicals that are creating short circuitry, as well as these kids are very special and dimensionally connected. So already they're like operating in different dimensions at the same time. They operate a little differently. It doesn't mean that when they're daydreaming, they're having the same daydreaming experience that others have. They may be leaving their body and parking their body there so that the teacher or somebody doesn't get in trouble because the child just disappeared and shapeshifted in the room. I mean, that's a little wild, but so they worked out enough agreement to not get into certain kind of trouble. But at the same time, I think they're connected with a lot of amazing things. And then you come along with chemicals that are perhaps intentionally been put in there to create a short circuit so those kids don't fully come up online. As you track what's happening with them all around the world, it's pretty interesting.
So even today, there are people that want to control how much we can wake up.
Yeah, I believe that. I've seen and heard enough things from people I respect. I believe that. Not that they're going to ultimately win out, but I do believe that a lot of the things that we're being given, fluoride in the food causes all kinds of problems in the human system, and so does chlorine. And things that short circuit. The DNA is not operating properly because of the chemistry that's being fed. It's in the foods, it's in the water, things in the air, And so in spite of that, I think some of these indigo, crystal, other kinds of kids have something they're going to turn on that even in spite of Agent Orange and all kinds of toxins, they don't get sick. Or they heal up so fast it catches people's attention because something else is turned on in their potential to where they did not have to go down with the lower level of the toxins and why those toxins were placed into the environment, why they're allowed to be there, why they're in the gardens, with the sprays that get into the food, get into the soil, or why they're in the injections and so on. I mean, that's a whole field. There's quite a bit of research going on about what's in that stuff and what it can do. I don't specialize in talking about, it's not my role to go out and expose that. But there are those who do, who are very articulate.
And you do think about it, and you see it.
I do. I feel it, and I feel I have a certain responsibility to know some. And I have trouble sometimes knowing some of the things that I've woken up to and not letting it depress me or feeling like, what can I do? Or I can't do enough. So I have to watch the kind of input that I get, or at least monitor how I'm reacting to it. And that's very challenging for me to see certain suffering and things going on. But I do feel inside, in my being, in my soul, that I do need to know something. I can't just ignore it and go and write my music. I tried that many years, to go deep in music and to not look at those things. But I don't feel very capable of doing that now. So sometimes I don't write because I don't feel good about what's going on. And I'm trying more to get back to the place where I compose and do the good work that I can with my talents, and not do my talents because I'm watching too much or reading too many emails about all the breakdowns in the world. So I've gone through a period of saying, well, what do I need to be awake to so that I can be more effective and not go down because of what I've given attention to? That's been real challenging.
I think that we're all challenged by that because when you're a certain kind of person, you have an empathy with the world and what's going on in it. And it does matter what is happening because what affects one affects us all. We know that because we're all totally connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I feel those things.
So when we're a part of the field, then we will feel the experiences, the feelings, the caring, the nurturing, all of the things that are necessary parts of us as individuals living on this planet right now. You can't isolate yourself from somebody who's in another country or something, or even in this country, starving to death.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean that is a global issue. It's a unified issue that we all have to take responsibility for.
I try to put an infusion into the music, and also a way of being, and in talking and teaching and doing things also, so that somehow the energies that are coming out can make a difference, even though I may not know how to make the difference I would like to make. But to have that intention go into the music, so if somebody hears it, something can shift and heal or reset, or conditions can be reversed. That's a political correct way of talking about reversal of conditions rather than healing, where something can reset itself, and that maybe I could just write a song and put enough love into that song that even if very few people hear it, and I play it at home by myself in my living room, the vibe goes out.
Activate something.
It goes out into the field. Doesn't have to be on a professional recording in order to have the effect, although usually I think it does. But the fact that I'm just playing it somehow radiates into the field, because our minds have that ability to penetrate instantly the entire unified field instantly, faster than radio waves.
And what I'm thinking about when you're saying this is the story of the writing of the Warsaw Concerto, which was done during the bombing of London.
Yeah.
And the man who wrote it, whose name I can't remember right now, you probably do, but that was written as the bombs were being dropped all around this man.
Yeah.
And somehow that vibration, every time I hear it, I hear that story, but it takes me to a different place because of the vibration itself. And knowing where it came from adds to it, but it doesn't, I don't have to have it to complete that.
One of the profound French composers, Olivier Messiaen from France, wrote a piece, a quartet for the end of time. He wrote it in prison. No instruments around or anything. Very deep, way heavy piece of music. When you have these circumstances whereby somebody, I believe what happens is they compress. There's a good use of compression before expansion. And Yeshua, Jesus, talks about that, and how you compress. And they go somewhere so compressed that they can create deeper. And then that explodes and gets released in some kind of way. And I believe those war situations often create that level of focus and compression, like you don't know how many more breaths you're going to have between this moment and the next. So you take your life so seriously, but you're not frozen to where you can't operate. Obviously, he could still compose, he could still hear, but that kind of compression, then there's this expansion. I have a music student who was from Cambodia, and first time I met her, she said all she hears is the lyrics. She doesn't hear the music at all. I thought, this is interesting. She's wanting to study music and sound healing and so on, and yet she doesn't hear the music when she puts it on. It's like tuned out. And so I asked her if there were loud sounds. Well, what happened is in her village in Cambodia, the bombs were going off, so she shut down to sound. Yet she can hear the lyrics, and that doesn't threaten her. So in one lesson, in a couple comments that I happened to make, and she broke down and cried and released this. And then after that, she started actually hearing the instrumental portions of music that she was not hearing, not connecting with it. Beats, rhythms, various things. She could hear the lyrics and hear the story, but somehow she made a separation between somebody singing the song and all the instrumental stuff that was going on in the song. And all it took was one or two questions, and she was ready to pop and release that, and realized that she had shut down because of the loud sounds from the bombs. And so she shut down so much the sound that even listening to a song in the radio or in a shop where she works with the sound system on, she did not even hear what was going on in the music. Wow. That was very interesting. And I hope she appreciates me sharing the story, because maybe that'll affect others, because people have had traumas happen because of loud sounds. Extremes with sound is one of the big traumas. And if you've been around bombs and been around explosions and things, that can affect the way you hear, because you never know if your life is going to be threatened by the sound being more than you can deal with. And so she moved through the whole thing. And now she's able to hear it. She's just waking up very quickly. It's a very beautiful example. I feel grateful to have been there and to ask the right question to liberate her from having to be walled, compartmentalized away from sound. I mean, she got her life back with sound, in a way. Wow. That was just, those
Profound.
moments,
Profound.
Yeah. I mean, not saying I'm as a healer. I just, I'm a witness. I'm a vehicle to facilitate something. And sometimes that involves a certain kind of listening, and that'll inspire a certain kind of question. And if I ask the right question at the right time because I listened, then the field could reset. So that came through me. So I don't claim any. Yeah, they're coming. You can clue them in as to what we're doing.
Okay.
I've got some interesting characters coming here, which you'll enjoy.
Okay.
To do some really interesting things.
So rather than put everybody through a kind of confusion about that, we're in a place where we could begin to think about ending this But I'd like to ask you what would be an important question to me. We have a broad group of viewers of this show, and they're all around the world. And they listen to the show because they know that we talk to people who are truly deeply committed to what they're trying to accomplish in life and to teach others. If you could tell our viewer one thing that they could do right now to either reset themselves or to improve their lives or to grow spiritually, anything like that, what would it be right now?
To basically find where the best of the joy is. And I believe the Creator wants us to follow that joy. And that's why the joy comes up and things trigger the joy, to show you what your path is. And many people are afraid of following that joy because they've been criticized, or things happened, or it didn't happen the way they thought. Or they're very happy and people say, why are you so happy? Or why are you joyful? So there seems to be a bit of a thought field in the collective conscious that sometimes puts a lid or influences the lid that people put on. And if they can find where that joy is, I believe that's one of the spiritual tickets that the Creator gives us. Why do some people light up over this? It could be cooking, it could be music, it could be photography, healing. And what is it that you light up? That was given to us. There's a reason that's in place. And so we drop down the rabbit hole of our own being. And with that joy, it wouldn't abandon us. The Creator doesn't abandon us in following that joy. It's given to us for a reason. And then everybody would find what that is. And maybe they haven't yet found the format. But what's their joy that would lead to that format? And now, what is the greatest joy that could be? So it could be somebody going to a concert. Then later on, they imagine themselves playing an instrument, and then maybe later they play it. But take the joy where it is, and then take the steps that lead from that, and keep dropping down that place, because I believe there's a purity in that does not create harm for anybody, because you wouldn't want to if you're that fulfilled from following your bliss and following your joy. You naturally wouldn't be doing things or create music necessary that would create harm or create anything, because there's a fulfillment that happens, and in that fulfillment, like a portal opens, and that presence of the Spirit keeps showing itself from the inside out, leaks out of you, and things happen, endearing things start happening in the environment. Maybe you're playing guitar somewhere and a butterfly comes up and lands on you. You have a profound moment, or things happen, or you hear the birds differently and the bees and the sounds they're making. I tune my piano to the same thing that the bees' wings go to. Things like that. And so I basically feel that joy is there as a guiding light. It's built into us. It's like a special elixir, like that elixir that Yeshua got out of his brain head area when he was wandering in the desert. He could get a few drops of this elixir, and that's all he needed to eat. He didn't need to eat anything. Just a couple drops of that chemically nourished his whole body. Well, I believe that joy and those drops are planted in us if we follow those seeds. And all you have to do is look right now. There is somewhere to start. Not like you have to get to something before that's going to work. Every day, right now, there is something. And you just keep following that something, then you drop down deeper, and then that becomes the next right thing. Then you're not off the path, going off and getting degrees that you don't want because somebody wants you to become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, and you never wanted to. That's not following that bliss. Not that it couldn't eventually come around, and if that's a person's path to like look like they got off the path, so that when they got back on the path, the off the path stuff helps them relate. That there is that, if that's their path. But other people, I think that the code is in us, and it's our job to get out of the way. And the way we get out of the way is dropping into that moment, being so present where the joy is that we find those things, those clues, and that keeps us on a path and keeps the lights lit, and then it attracts stuff to us. People come out of the blue, out of the wherever, because we're vibrating and resonating differently than when there's no joy present. We're not sending out the right signal. So how could that lead us in the right path? That the joy creates like a radar that goes to the entire omnimorphic field instantly, and any people anywhere in the world can pick up on our radar.
It's a transponder.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. receiving and transmitting, a transceiver type of situation. So I would say that would probably be the best. When I'm doing those things, I don't eat as much, I don't sleep as much. Other things work their way out when I don't let things erode my following that bliss. Because I have the challenge of also letting things erode or impinge on that. Thinking, how am I going to pay this bill if I write music all day here? And it's, things, all that stuff.
It's part of reality.
Yeah. Although I'd like to write all day,
So Karen?
I'm just delighted, Randy, that you were willing to share your story with us and with our listeners, and that I would like to be able to introduce them to your website, which is universalsong.net.
And also sacredwindchimes.com.
Yeah. Because if you walked into Randy's house, you would see all these incredible artifacts that literally, just by being here, you open up to that energy field.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's what they're here for.
I mean,
triggers.
You can't help but feel it when you walk in the door.
To play.
I felt it when we just talked over the telephone with one another. I could feel it.
Yeah.
But walking into it is even more powerful. So,
No, thank you. I
thank you
appreciate
so
that.
much for being
with us. A lot of love
us.
has gone into here, and people who have been here and their teachings and just the way they have energized the particles in the house. Like the better it gets, the better it gets.
Yeah.
So I'm really thankful for who's been here and what that is. This house has a history of teachings and things.
Well,
It's wonderful. It feels like it.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. This is big fun.
it's been wonderful. So thank you for taking
You're
the time
welcome.
to be with us.
I hope that there's good things for the listeners and viewers, that goodness comes to them from our talk. I really would like that.
We want to thank you. This has been a very surprise, special afternoon for us. And I can't imagine anybody that's watched this doesn't understand what a special person you are. And I can't imagine they would not want to know more about you by getting in touch with your website or you. And we want to just say thank you for allowing us to be part of your environment and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience with us. It's been a very special time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck and Karen. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. Karen, say the magic words.
God bless you, Randy. We're grateful.
Yeah,
We're
me
very
too.
grateful.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
All right.
Yeah, that's fun.
Good job. Good job.
Yeah, just whatever. That's what this part of a suite for cetaceans that I wrote called the Cetacean Suite, dedicated to dolphins and whales.